Welcome to, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We have with us today two eminent speakers. We have Siobhan Simpson from 91 Asset Management, and we also have Dr. Anton Meyberg, a foremost pulmonologist and what has become an absolute COVID expert. So we're very, very proud and glad to be having both of us today. Siobhan's role within the 91 is without looking at a CV, just from a colloquial standpoint, she often acts as the interface between 91 as a conglomerate and we as advisors, and helps us understand what the different fund managers are saying, and also helps the fund managers understand what we as advisors need. And we, of course, as advisors, are trying our very best to understand where you as clients are coming from. And Siobhan has a very unique ability to understand both yourselves as clients, ourselves as advisors, and the fund managers themselves. And so it's really, really no small pleasure, but a great pleasure indeed to be having Siobhan with us today. And Siobhan will be taking a look at the financial effects of COVID and how it's affected us over this period. As always, I just want to tell you that at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat section over there. Please feel free to add questions over there, and we will be asking both Siobhan and Dr. Meyberg at the end questions. So please feel free to ask questions. We're going to be aiming to finish the presentations just after 11 with questions by 11:15. So without any further ado, I want to take over to Siobhan. Thank you very much. Siobhan, the spotlight is yours.
Unmute myself. Thanks, Menachem, and thanks everybody for joining us. Like Menachem says, I'm very happy to take questions and answer anything that you please at the end. Hopefully, I'll give a PC answer. So skipping into it, I think the last 5 years have been 5 years. Thank goodness it hasn't been 5 years. Have been an extraordinary time. We prepared for lockdown in March, and few of us would have thought that we'd still be sitting here working from home now in August. And all indications are that we might still be here at the end of the year. So I think there's been quite a few asset management companies and the likes which have said to their staff, for the rest of the year, please work from home. 91, who some of you would have heard about, some of you might not have heard about, is the new name for Investec Asset Management. And we listed on the 16th of March, possibly the worst day that we could have listed. The market was down, I think, 8.5% on the day. But our share price has rallied since that. And it has been, it was part of our sort of strategic view to demerge from the broader Investec group. And any questions on that, I'm happy to take afterwards. So it's a year with a lot to worry about, and it started with COVID-19 surges and potential second waves that everyone is worried about. But that's also led to massive amounts of global unemployment, which is going to be with us for a period of time. We've seen an escalation in what some people are terming the new Cold War, the US-China trade. The trade war rhetoric has continued, and with no end in sight. I mean, you've seen actually the head of TikTok has resigned this morning because TikTok is now suing the US or whatever else is going on. So there is going to be no stoppage when it comes to that side. And then there's concerns of being raised around a tech bubble. And for those of you who were on the call earlier, we were talking about how last night even some of the tech stocks were up 26%. Was one, and the valuations on some of those stocks are looking quite full, as we would say. So they are looking a little bit expensive. The other thing is everyone's expecting, with all this money and all the stimulus that we'll talk about, where is the inflation? Is it going to come, and when will that be, and at what sort of rate will that be a concern? Is that something to worry about? And then the last thing, which I told Menachem that I definitely won't be giving my opinion on who will win, but there is an election at the end of the year, and no doubt that is going to cause a massive amount of noise to increase, and uncertainty around what will happen then. And when Trump was elected a few years ago, I mean, no one expected that to happen, and the markets actually rallied on the back of it. So just as you can't predict who will win, you actually can't predict sometimes how the markets will behave, which I think is also an important point. Sometimes it's not how you think it is. All of those things to worry about. And then in South Africa, if that wasn't enough, we had no smoking, no drinking, and sometimes we have no electricity. And that is likely to continue, the no electricity part. So we are reopening the economy, and it is a good thing. We're now at level 2. It says there in this chart, it's about 83% open. It's probably a little bit more than that. And that's back up and running. It's the right thing to do. And why is that the case? Well, I hope I'm not going to contradict anything Anton says, but really it's been a battle, a hotly debated battle between the health concerns and the economy, the economic concerns, how many people are going without jobs and without income. And from the stats, it looks like we've reached the peak infections. There's always concerns about a potential second wave, but in most of the provinces, it looks like our numbers, this is done on a rolling 7-day average, has rolled over as such, has reached the peak. So together with, yes, we're in level 2, but it hasn't been an easy chance getting here. And not only has there been a battle between the economic and the health side of things, there's also been a battle politically. There's been political agendas. I mean, I don't have to tell you about that if you're a smoker. There's infighting, and there's obviously the misappropriation of funds that we've had to watch on the sidelines from our homes. The impact of all of this is that we're likely to grow by -8% this year. And unfortunately, it'll take us around 6 to 7, hopefully not 8 years to make up what we've lost this year. Now, yes, some of it is due to COVID, and it is, it was kind of the nail in our coffin to some extent. We went into the crisis week, and we're in a troublesome time at the moment, and all of us are feeling it. And the numbers are showing it. So this is a consumer confidence index, and it shows that the last time we were levels were this low was back in the mid-80s. And it's really filtering through into the earnings of some companies, in particular the SA Inc. sector, what we term the SA Inc. sector, the retailers and the banks, and we'll talk a bit about that later. And I mean, recently some of the banks have reported earnings going back, so down over 90%. So some significant troubles in the more South African sectors, the sectors that weren't allowed to trade, or particularly the ones that are related to the consumer. I mean, personally, I don't think I've bought any clothing this winter because I don't need anything. I can come to work in my leggings and my tackies and all my slippers. So we've had this weakness, and while the markets, we felt it in March this year, the markets quickly dropped. And on the left-hand side here, you can see the global markets down 34% from peak to trough, and the SA market on the right, also down significantly. Then you saw a quick rally again, and we're going to talk to why that happened. And it really was a result of the amount of stimulus that was pushed into the market. Last night, the US reached another all-time high, and it just keeps making new highs and new highs. And you wouldn't think that there was kind of like a 1 in a 100-year pandemic out there based on what the markets are doing. So like I said, it's a result of the massive amount of stimulus that the governments and central banks, we'll talk to central banks now, have put into the market. Now, this is a little bit of a technical chart when you see something that says US Federal Reserve M2 money supply, but all you need to look at is how quickly that line goes up. And what it does is it shows you the magnitude of the increase in the amount of money in the US. So back in 2008, you will remember the global financial crisis, the markets dropped so significantly. And then they flooded the market again with stimulus, and they called it QE, quantitative easing. Now, the quantitative easing that they did post the global financial crisis, during COVID, they did the same amount in 1 week. So the extent of the stimulus has been enormous. And it's not only the stimulus that's helped the markets, it's also the fact that the Fed, which is the equivalent of our Reserve Bank, has said that they will keep rates on hold and low until 2022. So we've seen rate cuts across the world, and the Fed, as well as all other, I won't say all, a lot of other central banks have promised to support the market. So why is this important? And really it's because, if you think about it, interest payments for the government and for companies, if you keep those low by keeping rates lower, you allow them either to pay back their debt faster or to use that money elsewhere to grow the economy. So by keeping rates low, it's also a stimulus measure that the central bank can use to encourage the economy. So the same thing has happened in South Africa. We've seen rates drop to 3.5%, which is incredibly low. It's the lowest that we've ever had interest rates in South Africa. I mean, I've got one friend that says the amount that they're saving on their bond, they're being able to pay for their school fees for their child. Not that they were going to school. But that is definitely a stimulus measure as well that central banks have managed to use throughout the world. Oops, there we go. And it's not just the US, and this was a complete game changer that happened in pivotal moment in the EU in July this year, when they agreed on a stimulus package to counter the impact of the pandemic across all 27 members of the bloc. So it's the biggest joint borrowing initiative agreed by the EU ever. And you think back to a few years ago when there was all of these concerns around the EU breaking up. This was very much a moment which proved that they were willing to work together as such. Yeah. So I spoke about, with all this money, this almost free money and interest rates so low, you would think that it would result in inflation. And where is this inflation? And my honest answer is I'm actually not sure why it hasn't happened even post the financial crisis. If you think about the amount of money that was also pumped into the market there, you would think that there was, there would result in some inflation, but it hasn't come through. And there's a variety of theories that are out there when it comes to why it hasn't. One of which is that we're becoming more efficient and robots are taking over jobs, so that there's less wage inflation. There's a whole lot of stuff that people talk to when it comes to why hasn't there been inflation. Ultimately, at some point, if all things go according to how they should, all this free money should create some form of inflation. But it's the level and how quickly it comes that will scare markets. So you saw a surprise inflation number, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, which spooked the markets for a day or two. Our inflation came out yesterday at 3.2%. Yes, I know that's not what we all pay when we go and we buy our groceries. Slightly higher than what we would have expected. There were one or two funnies in the numbers, like funerals and vehicle sales. But we do think that inflation will sort of, this is a temporary blip, and inflation will kind of average to 2.9 to 3.2, I think, for the rest of the year. And what is all this free money? If not created inflation, what has it actually done? Well, it's driven up the prices of some stocks significantly. And this is what we were talking about before we started. The tech stocks have driven the markets over the last sort of 5 years, and in particularly over sort of the year to date. And even last night, some of these names on this slide were up over 10%. So not as much as Neil's Bitcoin, but significantly. So what you can see here is the blue line on the left is what they would classify as the FAM stocks. I can't really say it because N and M are next to each other here. It's quite difficult. But it's essentially Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Alphabet, which is Google, and Microsoft. And you can see how significantly they've outperformed the rest of the market. The rest of the S&P, excluding those stocks, is the red line. So we called it here the S&P 494 because it's not obviously 500. And you can see the big jaws that have opened up over the last period of time. So what was big here already got bigger. And why was this? Well, really it was a result of the earnings. These were the stocks that were receiving earnings upgrades, doing better than the rest of the market. And you can see how those jaws on the right-hand side also increased. The disclaimer here is that it's not just these 5 or 6 stocks that have done well over the last period of time. There are some others, but these stocks make up now over 20% of the S&P. And it's the first time in 42 years that the largest 5 stocks have made up such a significant portion of the S&P index. And it's actually the first time ever that the stocks have all been from the technology sector. Menachem nearly took my thunder earlier when he was talking about Apple's market cap. Last week it reached $2 trillion, right? And I think as of last night I looked, it was 2.15. So it's climbing even further. And based on last night's move, it probably will be bigger now. Just to put it in perspective, the size of the FTSE, that's the UK stock market, is only $2.2 trillion. So Apple is nearly, and might be this morning, bigger than the entire UK market, equity market, which I think is quite staggering. Moving on to South Africa, and while it's been a narrow market offshore, it's also been quite a narrow market in South Africa. And this is a little bit of a complicated chart with all the sort of, tags at the bottom. So I've made it a bit simpler by just showing you, concentrate on the red line at the top. And really what that is, it's our Rand hedge stocks and resources. So it is the stocks that get benefit from selling their stuff to people or companies outside of South Africa. Their earnings are not only from South Africa, the global type stocks. So think Naspers, think Richemont, think some of the resource stocks as well. Then you look at the bottom, the kind of blue line next to the South African flag. And those are the SA Inc. type stocks, the ones I mentioned earlier, the ones that are the banks, the retailers, the ones that maybe couldn't open during lockdown. And you can see the difference in performance this year has been over 50%, and that's the dotted line at the bottom, showing how costly it is to make sure that you pick the right stocks. So unfortunately, this year, certain stocks got hit harder by lockdown than others. But together with Bitcoin, and while it has had a little bit of recent volatility, the one thing that you did want to hold a little bit this year of is a little bit of gold. And the saying goes that all that glitters is not gold. But in the last few months, it's been gold and other precious metals. And the reason being is that gold, it has an economic, it's sensitive to political and economic uncertainty. So if you look at the chart here, the red is the gold price, and the dark blue line is a political, global economic uncertainty index, and it does the changes. And you can see as that increases quite significantly, so does the gold price. So economic and political uncertainty has been rising, and therefore there's a flight to safety. And gold is one of those safe haven assets. Together with that, you've had what we would say monetary policy being eased globally. So interest rates, like I said to you, are very low. And why is that good for gold? Well, gold is a very strange asset in that it doesn't pay you a coupon or a dividend. You just buy gold and that's it. Whereas, say, for example, money in the bank will pay you some interest to hold money in the bank. But at the moment, with interest rates being close to zero, if you have excess cash and you put it in the bank, you're not getting anything in terms of a yield or interest. And the same thing as gold. So the cost of holding gold is the same as putting money in the bank. And thirdly, there's been a lot of stimulus. So people have, they're starting to question the traditional fiat currencies as such. The dollar has weakened, and all of these things are good for gold. So the reason Neil is holding Bitcoin is maybe an alternative to what we would say a fiat currency, a normal currency. So that is the other thing people turn to gold for as a store of value when they lose sight of or when they question, should I say, the value in some normal currencies. So always underpinning the potential price of gold is that there's only a certain amount of supply, and all the supply in the world, so everything that's being mined plus everything that is still to be mined, could apparently all fit into an Olympic size pool. So there's only a certain amount. So the other thing we get asked a lot about is our poor currency, the Rand. And it's been a little bit of a roller coaster ride, but it's not just about us. And that's why I want to explain this very simply. We get a bit despondent as South African residents, and we read the newspaper and we have our lockdown measures seem to be a little bit crazy at times. But there's two things, well, there's a lot of things, but two main things that affect the rand. And it's really about the neighborhood that you're in. So who are you viewed together with? And we're viewed together with other emerging markets. So when Turkey has a problem and the Turkish lira sells off, the rand sells off together with the Turkish lira. Same thing with Brazil, same thing with Russia. So our neighborhood is not the same neighborhood as the United States and the UK and Australia and certain things like that. And then the second thing is, are you a good or are you a bad neighbor? So are you the party animal? Do you play your music late at night? Or are you a good, courteous neighbor? So how do you behave? So let's look at the first thing and look at the neighborhood. So, and while we sometimes feel, with the rand sitting at, now it's below 17, but it's gone all over this year, that it's just us. It's not just us. If you look at the dark green lines here, you'll see the 1 year number on the rand is about minus 17%, but the Brazilian real is down over 25%, the Turkish lira over 20%, Mexican peso, Russian ruble, all down in line with us. And you can see that the orange or yellowish color, that is the last 3 months where we've seen a slight amount of strength, and it's strength across all of the emerging markets. So it's not just us sometimes. Sometimes it's quite difficult for us to almost disconnect ourselves with this. Unfortunately, our currency, the rand, is one of the most liquid currencies, so it's very easy to trade. So it can get sold off and recover much quicker. So it makes it a little bit more of a volatile ride for us. So when we look at about whether we're a good neighbor or a bad neighbor, the kind of essay only type things, there's two conflicting things at the moment. And the one is the current account, which is essentially our imports and our exports. And that usually follows the terms of trade. That is the terms of trade, and it follows the rand. At the moment, we've actually got a current account surplus because our imports are less than our exports. So we are essentially receiving more dollars than we are paying out at the moment. So that is actually in surplus, which can be deemed positive. The other side of it is your capital account. And this is the one which is struggling, where we've seen a massive, and you've probably seen it in the news, a lot of foreigners selling of SA bonds. Our foreign ownership was at about 37% at the beginning of this year. It's sitting now at 30%. Together with the selling of SA bonds that actually foreigners have sold in excess now of 5 billion rands worth of SA equities as well. So we are losing money from the capital account side. And yes, you would have read in the newspaper, there was a certain amount of this that was related to the junk status and us exiting the WIGB, but the outflows from foreigners have continued post this. Luckily, so you can see that on the top line, that the non-resident number has come down. Luckily, who has been buying our bonds, because obviously if you've got lots of sellers and you don't have any buyers, you're going to have a big problem in the price. Our Reserve Bank and the banks have stepped in, and you can see how they've increased their amount that they own. And the other people that have increased it are fund managers like ourselves. And why have we increased it? Well, actually, because the yield that you get on it, what the bond is earning you, is significant. Cash and inflation are in the 3% types, right? Maybe 3.2 for inflation, 3.5 for cash. And a bond, SA bond, is offering you 9%. So the pickup for the additional risk that you're taking on is actually very attractive. And if you look at the chart that I'm showing you here, this shows you essentially the real yield. So the yield minus inflation, it's the best that you can get around the world. So very, very attractive. The negative that comes with this is that there's a lot of supply that's coming on stream. So the South Africa is issuing a lot of bonds, which obviously is a negative and something we need to watch. But right now, one of our preferred asset classes is SA bonds, as crazy as that sounds, given what we are going through. The other thing that we really like is, as a house, is offshore equities. And it's not necessarily the racy FANG stocks and the ones that I spoke to you earlier about. A lot of the time it's the steady eddy stocks who we use in our everyday life. And I think this slide shows you quite nicely the type of stocks that are actually in one of our funds called Global Franchise, which some of you would invest in through Octagon. You wake up in the morning, you wash your hair, you use Johnson & Johnson shampoo. You have your morning coffee, that's Nespresso, it's a Nestle company. You get to work and you log on, it's Office 365, and that's a Microsoft company we own. You pay for when you were going out, but maybe it's some online shopping now that we work from home. You use your Visa credit card. Visa is one of our top holdings. We don't have Ben & Jerry's in South Africa, but you could maybe also have a Bar One, which is Nestle. And again, I don't play online gaming, but some of the children do. And there's FIFA 20 is a recent purchase of ours in the form of Electronic Arts. It's a gaming company similar to the likes of a NetEase and Tencent in China. You watch Fox News, we don't, we can watch something else, but you know, there's plenty of things. We don't hold Netflix, so me watching Netflix at night is wouldn't make it onto the slide. And then in the evening we go and you put on your makeup, I mean your skin cream, which is Nivea, which is from Beiersdorf, which I can never say. Or you could brush your teeth and it's Colgate. We used to own Colgate as well. So a lot of these companies are ingrained in our everyday life. No matter whether we work from home or we work in the office, we still continue to use them. And that's why we like these type of stocks. Just a little bit of fun on a lighter note. It's funny how things change. I mean, if I look at my own life, I can see we watch the online game drive now. People have been doing gym in their homes, watching a TV. There's plenty of things. We're doing webinars like this that have changed. But one of the things that's quite amusing is the change in Google searches since January. And restaurant searches are obviously top right there, are obviously were massively down, but the search for yeast and recipes were much increased. People clearly making their own bread and trying out some new recipes. And the funniest ones, I think, are at the bottom there in the home entertainment and painting by numbers, hair clippers, Netflix, and tie-dye for some reason. Also receiving huge increases in searches. And I think maybe just important to say that tie-dye is probably not cool at any point. So please resist the temptation to tie-dye anything. One important thing, I think we've gone through a rocky road. It's been a very, very difficult last few months. But the worst thing you can do is chop and change. And the markets in March, April, and May proved that with a significant drop and then the quick recovery. And this is a research done, and I'm sure you've seen some similar charts before. This one is done on the S&P since 1987, which is, I think, 8,103 days. And you can see here, if you had been invested for the full period, you would have made just over $20 million. If you had missed 10 of those best days, you would halve your money and you would have only invested, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, 9.5. So a significant decrease by trying to time the market. And that's why we have people like Menachem, Steve, Neil, and the Octagon team to try to keep us sane in the times where it goes down and all we want to do is get out. But you can see how quickly sometimes those things recover. I think sometimes we get a little bit despondent and we feel a little bit down and out because we read the news and we watch the TV and we see things happening. But rest assured that there are opportunities out there. With these times of uncertainty come new things to invest in. Some of the good companies we bought in March because their share prices had declined so much. 91 as fund managers and Octagon as your financial advisors are here to seek out these opportunities, but more importantly, to manage the risk around these opportunities. Sometimes you've got to look a little bit harder to actually see what exists. And I think that's what we have to do at the moment, just because it's a little bit more uncertain and tough out there. I'm going to take one last thing as a one last slide as a virtual plug as such, because I know Menachem is a sporty character. So hopefully some of you are on here are sporty characters as well. 91 is running a virtual challenge on this Saturday, and we are wanting to try raise R1 million, and then the business will match that. So there is an online, you buy a ticket, which is 50 Rand. You can do a 5K walk run, you can do a 10K, you can do a cycle, and you post it. And there's lots of prizes up for grabs. And I think it's a nice way to do something different as a group. I've got 10 mates running, but we are going to run very spread out. I think you're allowed 10 now. But do something in your neighborhood, and hopefully have some fun while doing it. So that's me.
So thank you so much, Siobhan, as always. Thank you. And, ladies and gentlemen, before we hand over to Anton, who I know is going to be talking about running, Siobhan, you've just kind of hit a sensitive one there. We've been listening to Dr. Meyberg explain to us the risks of running as teams for a while.
You can,
no, that's good. It's good. But I just want to firstly thank you to Siobhan specifically, and to 91 Asset Management is one of our key strategic partners. In fact, when I started the business all those years ago, in those days, Investec Asset Management, I always say I grew up in Investec Asset Management. Even though I never worked there, my first strategic partnership was with 91 Asset Management, and it's been an amazing partnership. And what's really great, Siobhan, is that you have now taken a really complex environment, explain to us where we are, where the opportunities are. And I just want to take 2 minutes just to speak about an opportunity that is happening next Thursday. Siobhan, we were speaking about it offline a few moments ago, where we're having an offshore webinar. So this normal time, our 10 to 11 o'clock slot, will be about offshore webinar, how to invest offshore, and how Octagon invest for clients offshore, specifically using 91 Asset Management. And so there's going to be quite a lot of really new and innovative information coming out of that webinar. Siobhan, if I could ask you to hold, because there are quite a few questions coming through. But before we do, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Meyberg, Dr. Anton Meyberg. As I mentioned before, Dr. Meyberg is a pulmonologist operating from Linksfield Clinic, but since the start of COVID has really become our go-to person when it comes to true hardcore knowledge of how to navigate our way through what is a seriously difficult environment. And firstly, a very sincere thanks, I think, from all of us in our community for everything Dr. Meyberg has done and everything that his colleagues, medical colleagues, have done. Because as we have, as Siobhan said, sitting at home, really not under massive pressure, it's Dr. Meyberg and his colleagues who have been under incredible pressure. So a very sincere and very heartfelt thanks to Dr. Meyberg and his family, because obviously they've sacrificed a lot of him. I don't think Nikki, Dr. Meyberg's wife, has seen him much over the last 6 or 7 months. Maybe I'll reintroduce you guys in about a year's time. But really a very sincere thank you for everything that you guys have done for South Africa, because we owe you a huge debt of gratitude. And so without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Meyberg. Dr. Meyberg will give us a bit of an introduction, and then we at Octagon have put together a lot of questions. I don't think we're going to get through half of them, but we've got a heck of a lot of questions we'd like to get through to ask you some information. But Dr. Meyberg, over to you for now.
Thanks, Nathi, and thanks for those kind words. Siobhan, thank you for that excellent presentation. I must say, being a doctor, I don't think I understood about 2% of it, but it was very interesting and very exciting. The one part I did understand is the part where you said that you haven't bought much clothing. That I take home personally because I know my own wife hasn't bought much clothing. So from a financial and economic point of view, this coronavirus has been very good for me. The Bible speaks of many a pandemic that affected the nations, including the 10 plagues, the plague of leprosy, and many others. And throughout the narrative, we are witness to divine intervention and healing. We're now in the midst of level 2 lockdown. You would not be incorrect to say that you are confused about what all this means and where to from here. Do we need a miracle, or is that the vaccination that we are waiting for? Our lives are unpredictable, to say the least, and our economic stability and health status are fluctuating. It is still mandatory to wear a mask in public. Physical distancing and restrictions on leisure and social activities are in place to prevent a resurgence of this virus. but now is the time to take matters seriously. We started off with early lockdown, albeit the critics deny this had any impact, but working in ICU and the hospital setting, for me, there's no doubt that this saved countless lives, for it gave us the opportunity to prepare, the chance to set up COVID dedicated wards and learn how to don and doff in protective clothing, the chance to demarcate areas in the hospitals as green, yellow, and red areas, indicating the level of virus threat. The most important reality to come to now is that we have not won this war. We cannot begin to celebrate just yet, because there's still an enemy lurking in the background. Even though the numbers being recorded are much lower at present, we are only expecting to see the fallout from going down to level 2 in the next 1 to 3 weeks. We are desperate to prevent a second surge. That is dependent on you, it's dependent on me, and it's dependent on all of us. We need to wage a war on the pandemic. It's time to take back what was once ours and what is rightfully due to us. But we can only do this if we work together. We have to respect the rules of lockdown, social and public distancing, wearing of face masks at all times, washing hands and hand sanitization. These are the crucial non-pharmacological measures we need to implement. Interprovincial travel is now allowed, local and some international flights as well. Gathering for religious purposes and funerals are allowed up to about 50 people, and social interaction with a maximum of 10 people are allowed. However, just because the government says it is okay, doesn't mean that the medical community agrees. There still has to be strict containment and curtailment to protect us all. Just how strict we will be is determined from where we're going from here. Good morning, I'm Anton Meyberg. Thank you for having me on this webinar today, where hopefully I can answer your questions and create some calm in this pandemonium and awareness in our situation.
Thanks, Anton. So thank you very much for the introduction. And again, thank you for everything you're doing for us. I want to start with some easy questions because what I'm obviously going to do is stay away from politics because number one, there's a great deal of subjectivity in politics. And number two, there's more emotion than necessary when it comes to politics. And so let's just try to stick to where we know that we have factual information. So starting with smoking, notwithstanding the surrounding rumors about certain politicians profiting from that, do you agree with the smoking? I know you're a pulmonologist. You and I are both health freaks, so obviously we're anti-smoking. My question about smoking is more specific to this. My younger brother is a smoker, and obviously I'm not happy with him smoking, but I also understand that he is a smoking addict. I've always struggled with this idea that I'm saying to him, you may no longer smoke. And if you do smoke, you are breaking the law. So what was your opinion about the smoking issue? And do you support now the unbanning of smoking or of cigarette selling? Where are you on that one?
So as you correctly said, I'm a pulmonologist, and my job is to help people with smoking cessation and techniques to stop smoking and not to smoke, because we all know the evils of smoking. We all know what passive smoking does. We all know that it affects your lungs. There's degrees of asthma that you can get from it. There's emphysema, COPD, there's lung cancer. So smoking is an evil. Now, from the political point of view, what the government did by banning smoking is a pure political thing. However, we know that the virus works on something called an ACE2 receptor. And this virus binds to that receptor in the cells, and that's in the respiratory cells and in the endothelial cells. And smokers are known to exhibit much higher levels of these ACE2 receptors. So they're at a much higher risk to contract the virus. And if they do contract the virus, they're at a much higher risk to get sicker from the virus. So we can take this across a spectrum with many diseases and say, well, why didn't the government ban sugar for diabetics? And why didn't the government ban other things for people with high blood pressure? Why didn't they ban salt? Because if you've got high blood pressure and it's a high risk thing, why didn't they ban that? So there has to be some political agenda with this. And we think we know that there is a political agenda. It's not easy just to go cold turkey and stop smoking. It can cause aggression. It can cause other problems. And we would love all of our patients to stop smoking. It would put us out of business, but it would be the best thing for everybody, because they would then start getting better lung functions, better ability to breathe better, and a lot less sicker. I mean, if you extrapolate, you take it one step further with the alcohol. We've seen throughout all the casualties throughout South Africa, and mainly all the public hospitals, when they've banned the alcohol, the number of trauma admissions have decreased by more than 80%. That tells you quite a lot. Okay, that tells you that these things are evil. You know, whether we are going to agree or disagree about stopping the smoking and them stopping people from smoking, it's a moot point. It definitely does help, but I don't believe it was the be-all and end-all of this whole pandemic.
Okay, thank you. So a question of here, with the recovery rate hitting, I think it's 82% as of last night in South Africa.
85 now.
Is it 85? It's 85 now. Is this an indication of things really improving? Or is this, as you mentioned before, a potential lull before the serious second wave? And on this, I wanted just to ask you some practical questions. My wife and I went to Cape Town for a few days. We got back night before last. It was an interesting trip. We flew with masks the whole way. The airport's dead. So notwithstanding the economic fallout that Siobhan was speaking about, Cape Town wasn't Cape Town. It wasn't the Cape Town I know. And so what you're seeing is, so in Cape Town, in Joburg, everybody's wearing masks. People are really, I think, from what I can see, really playing ball and doing the best they can. You in terms of what you're seeing, do you obviously be fearful about a second wave? Do you see it happening, or do you think we're doing enough to stop it?
So as you said, there's an 85% recovery rate, which is dramatic. And we believe that that's due to the fact that we had enough time to prepare with the lockdown. You know, the other countries all over the world started their first cases in the beginning of February, at the end of January. We only saw our first case in March. And the really serious cases started hitting us at the end of April and the beginning of May. So we had a lot of time to prepare our hospitals, get them ready, set up essential COVID wards, set up protocols and groups in order how to treat this. The numbers are coming down dramatically. And that's not because they're not testing. It's because they don't need to test. We're seeing in all of our hospitals, all of the casualties, there are less tests being done because people have been observing the social norms, because they've been wearing their masks, because they have been doing all of these things. It's definitely a big issue here that's helped dramatically with that. Sorry, let me just
I'm going to get that noise in a second.
Okay, I'll
cool.
be back.
We are. Apologies about that. So thank you for that, Anton.
I think the point is that, you know, everyone believes that we are going to get a second surge. And we are fearful, to say the least, of a second surge because everyone's becoming lackadaisical now. Everyone's dropping the ball. They're saying, hold on, you know, we're down to level 2 now. So surely now we can go have a meal with a family tonight and, you know, it's okay. We won't wear a mask and we'll have more than one family over, 10 people, 12 people. What difference does it make? It shouldn't make a difference. And you brought it up, so I'm going to bring up the running. You know, running is a massive thing. You know, you run on the road together with more than one person, you're at risk of spreading virus. Because if you're running next to the person and you're not wearing a mask or a buff, you can catch the person in a drift of your virus, whether it's aerosolized, whether it's droplet spread. At the end of the day, you still need to prevent that virus from being spread to people. So we've still got a duty to prevent the spread of this virus. Because if we don't do what we need to do now, more so now in the second stage or the second level of lockdown, we are definitely going to see a surge in the next few weeks. You know, Gauteng is the highest density population in the world. And we've got places like Alexandra where there are multiple people going in taxis and all over. And at this point, we've actually managed to curtail the spread quite dramatically. I mean, we've only got 600,000 cases in over 50 million people, which is a dramatic number. We need to continue that. We need to maintain that, because if we don't and we let our guard down now, we're in for a bigger challenge for the second surge. And we saw that during the Spanish flu, and we're seeing it all over the world. Looking in America, look at places like Israel, look at Spain, all over the world this is happening. So we've got to be very careful.
Thank you. So you're just speaking about international. Obviously, I'm following Israel very closely, Europe very closely. And obviously, we follow from an economic standpoint incredibly closely these various countries. But to your best guesstimate, assuming we're going to get to the vaccine in a moment, and obviously we're going to spend some time there, but when do you see international, what do you call it, pleasure travel opening up again? Have you got any indication?
I think it all depends on what happens in the next few weeks. You know, that's our answer. You know, there's a high chance that if things carry on going well now, they might even take us down to level 1 in the next few weeks. That is dependent on the fact if we manage to keep the number of infections down, okay? Everyone wants to go on international travel, and there are a few cases where people are motivated to go overseas. But even take it one step lower, take it about local travel. Are we all going to be going to our holiday destinations in December? And if we are going, are we all going to be flying? You know, a lot of people have spoken about the fact that they don't want to fly and they'll be traveling by car. And I think if we can maintain this and keep this resurgence down, there's a high possibility this will be able to happen.
Okay. So let me ask you, one of the questions that I notice often comes up on your Sunday podcast as well is the concept of potential reinfection. Last night, it was either Japan or Hong Kong. My apologies. One of the two was Hong Kong. Hong Kong is now claiming that there was some type of reinfection, albeit different types of COVID, if I understood the headline correctly. Where are we on the chance of reinfection? And a person who has... So again?
Let me explain that to you. It's quite an important point. Okay? This case that they're speaking about in Hong Kong was a patient that was infected 142 days ago in Hong Kong that had the virus. They did what we call genomic sequencing of the actual virus at the time, and they picked up the exact strain of COVID-19, of coronavirus, that it was. The person then got better, and for a number of weeks they had negative swabs in between, and for a number of weeks they were doing well. They then went on a trip to Spain, and they came back from Spain and got sick again. So what the lab did is they resequenced the virus. Now, they took that same swab that they did on the patient then, and they took the new swab that they did on the patient now, and they compared the two swabs. And the reason why they call it as reinfection is because they noted that there's a number of new proteins on this swab that weren't there with the initial swab. So it's essentially a different strain. It's not a mutation of the virus, but it's a different strain of the virus. One was picked up in Hong Kong, and one was picked up in Spain. There's been a number of cases now in the Netherlands. They said there was about 4 cases of resurgence there. And I don't think it's a cause for major alarm, but it is a cause for concern. We need to be aware of it. It brings us to the whole talk about antibodies and T-cell receptors, that everyone believes that they've got this, as I said, passport immunity, that the antibodies are going to protect them forever. We don't believe that is so. We believe the antibodies are going to wane off and they're going to decrease dramatically, and you're going to lose that protection. And we're not entirely sure how long the T-cell response, that's your natural killer cells that kill off the viruses, we're not even sure how long that's going to last. Will it last for very long? And do the two cross-react? So these are very worrying effects. And we can't say just because you've had COVID-19, you're free to go out into the public. You know, there's the new tests have come out. The antibody tests have come out now. All the antibody test will tell you now is if you've been exposed to COVID-19. The tests they're doing now don't tell you if you've got if you've had an acute infection or if it's a chronic infection. In other words, they look at certain things. They look at something called an IgG and an IgM. And in the first week to 14 days after infection, you become IgG positive. That's your antibody. After the long term, you want your IgM to be positive, okay? Because that tells you that you've had an acute infection and you've been able to sort of react against the virus. So all it tells you is you've had the virus, but it doesn't tell you the amount of antibody you've got and how long the antibodies will last. So we've got to be very careful with that.
Yesterday we heard from the CEO of ESCOM. Quite interesting. One of the things they mentioned was that we'd come through the coldest winter, one of the coldest winters in history. And with load shedding, I think we felt it more than some, but thankfully not as many as those people on the street. We heard that the warmer weather is better for the virus, and colder weather incubates it. Where are we holding on that? Is that still prevailing thought coming into summer? Is it going to be better for us? Where are you guys holding on that?
So generally in the medical fraternity, we call winter the culling season, because winter is when all your old elderly patients with underlying comorbidities die. And this year has been particularly abnormal in many respects, because we haven't seen the typical influenza A, the influenza B, the adenoviruses, the respiratory viruses. And that's due to the fact that people have been wearing masks, have been socially distancing, have been locked up. So despite the cold weather, which normally promotes this, where people are all in the same rooms and are coughing on each other, we've actually seen a major decrease in other respiratory infections throughout this period. The warm weather and being outside definitely promotes health, and definitely is far better overall for virus spread and for spread of any of the diseases. So we're hopefully going into this warmer weather, and it will hopefully help overall. But once again, it doesn't mean you can have a massive gathering of 50 people all playing together on a field, not wearing masks and not observing the rules.
Okay. You've often spoken on your Sunday podcast about different vitamins that we should be taking. I'd like you to extend that question to diet as well. are there any specific foods, and obviously the enzymes within the foods that we're trying to derive, obviously, and any vitamins that we should be taking on a regular basis in general? It's something I've always wanted to know in general, because one of the things I've heard is that many of these vitamins you take, your body doesn't even absorb them. You just urinate them out anyway, so it's kind of a bit of a waste of time. And I've heard you speaking about multi-complex vitamins being the way to go. So if you could speak a bit about that and about diet as well, please.
So I'm a big proponent of urinating out your vitamins. I've always believed that if you have to take vitamins, you're just going to urinate them out, because we've all got generally good diets. We eat well. You eat balanced diets, and you eat vegetables, you eat salads, you eat meat and chicken and bread, so you can get all of your nutrients in the diet. That being said, I've changed my tune with this COVID-19, because we have found that multiple vitamins help in effectively decreasing viral load and attacking the virus and helping with the overall picture. And those vitamins are vitamin C, they are zinc, they are thiamine, vitamin D, and things like niacin or nicotinamide. So those definitely make a difference. I always get into trouble because I say that everyone should be on a multivitamin, something like Centrum or one of the other vitamins like Vitathione, and then everyone says they go to the pharmacies and they run out of them. But these are the general vitamins that you need to take. I mean, these are the good things to take now, especially in a winter season, especially if you're an athlete and you deplete your body and other things. You need to protect yourself during winter seasons from these type of things. From a diet point of view, you've got to be very careful with the amount of carbohydrates and the amount of sugar you're taking, because we note that the diabetic patients especially have taken a bigger strain from their comorbidities with this disease. And you've got to watch your diet very carefully. So we're not saying you shouldn't have carbohydrates, you shouldn't have sugars. You've got to have a balanced diet. You've got to eat well, you've got to be moderate, and at the same time, you have to exercise.
Yeah, Thomas, as if, I've only been saying this for 47 years. Finally, I get a doctor supporting what I've been saying. That's very good of you. Thank you. Pity about the soccer team that you support. But let me ask you, speak about sports. What about kids starting to play sports again, like soccer, where there is contact? And I know that you've often spoken about how important it is for our children to go back to school and to interact with one another. When it comes to sport, where's your thoughts on that? Okay,
so we know for a fact that children are not super spreaders of the virus. This whole super spreader of the virus thing came about from influenza, where children actually are super spreaders. But with the SARS-CoV-2, they are not the super spreaders of the virus. So they're less at risk, albeit they can still transfer the virus and transmit the virus and pick up the virus. There are certain cases where you get this multi-inflammatory syndrome in children, but it's very rare. Now, at this stage now in level 2 lockdown, where children are back at school, I think it's mandatory for them to get some exercise and some outdoor exposure. So yes, I do think it's important for them to kick a ball around. With regards to playing a soccer match, it becomes a lot more difficult, because yes, they're going to run around in the field with masks, but children are still children. They still want to hug each other after they score a goal. They still want to pat each other on the back. So you've got to be very careful with that and try passing the ball to each other, techniques like that. You can have tennis game where you have a hand sanitizer on the side of the thing, and you can just keep on sanitizing your hands throughout the whole match as long as you're wearing your mask. So we can start these sports, but you've got to be very careful with younger children who won't appreciate and understand the intricacies of not touching each other and not being put in a situation where they can't hug each other. So therefore I say a game like volleyball or netball, I would definitely say you can't play at this point in time. But passing the ball in soccer, tennis, table tennis, definitely go ahead.
Fantastic. Anton, I've got 2 more questions for you. Neither of them are easy. And then I'm going to ask Siobhan a question or 2, and then we can begin to wrap up. Question over here, I'm going to read it verbatim. While Australia, for example, goes into a higher stage of lockdown based on less than 100 new cases in a day, and the SA eases restrictions when we drop to under 3,500 a day, is this driven by politics and economics, or is there medical logic happening around the world? You did say before that you don't necessarily agree with what the government's doing. And obviously, being in the economic side, and we've seen the catastrophe that has happened economically, and literally daily we are hearing about insolvencies, in redundancies and this type of thing. So the economic case is incredibly obvious. From a medical standpoint, if you had a choice, would you say, no, it is time for us to open up, or have we gone too fast to level 2?
I think it is time for us to open up. I think that we have done dramatically well. I think the financial and economic instability that we have gone through because of this is devastating. And that's coming from a doctor who understands absolutely nothing about economic or financial issues. All I know is that you get a salary at the end of the month and you've got to pay your bills. So I can't tell you about all of those type of things. But there's a lot of critics out there that say that the lockdown was too long, it was unnecessary. Let me tell you, being on the front line, that lockdown has saved hundreds of thousands of lives in South Africa. We know it for a fact. We've seen it. I mean, the fact that my hospital had 8 COVID wards and is now down to 3 COVID wards, 1 ICU just for COVID patients. The writing's there. You can see it. It's obvious. We've done dramatic things. But at the same time, bringing back the economy is necessary for every single person. The two work hand in hand together, economy and health. You can't have an economy without health, and you can't have health without an economy. Yes, we needed to be strict at the beginning, but if people can just follow these rules and follow all of these things, then we can have the two hand in hand. You have to run the economy back. There's no doubt about it. I'm a big proponent of that, and the time is right now. And I don't believe it's political that they've started the economy back now. I think it's necessary. I think there's a big difference. Yes, there are lots of politics, and we know that with the smoking and the alcohol, there's lots of politics regarding all the corruption of the PPEs. But right now, we're in the best position we could have ever expected to be, and hopefully we can take it forward and prevent a second resurgence, but let's see what happens.
Do you think we're close to level 1?
I think the next 1 to 3 weeks will give us an answer of where we're going. So within 3 weeks' time, I think by the sort of end of the moratorium of the 15th of September, we'll know whether or not the government are going to be able to take us down if the numbers keep on dropping. I think yesterday there was about 1,600 new cases. So our numbers are still low. Even our death rate is extremely low. If you look at the numbers worldwide, it's an extremely low death rate for over 50 million people in one country, only related to COVID-19. And yes, there's a few issues about which deaths are COVID and which ones aren't. But I think there's a good chance that if we can maintain this, we will get there. But my only worry is human nature. Humans are fickle individuals. Me and you, we're all fickle. So we all get very excited and we start forgetting and we start getting lackadaisical. You always say once you've had your booze binge and then you get drunk and you vomit, I'm never touching alcohol again. And then 3 weeks later, you're back having another glass of whiskey or something like that. So we can't say what's going to happen in the next few weeks. We're hoping it's going to happen, but it's all about people's responsibility to not be selfish, to actually look after each other and actually keep the rules going for now.
Fantastic. Anton, last question, toughest one there is vaccine. Where are we with the vaccine? How hopeful are you personally, subjectively, about getting a vaccine before the end of this year? That's question number 1. And the dissemination of the vaccine. How quickly can we disseminate a vaccine around the world to actually get somewhere? Where are we on that?
Yeah, so those are 2 excellent questions. And I think with regard to vaccine, never before in human history have we seen a vaccine being developed so quickly and so efficiently. Let's take aside Sputnik 5, the Russian vaccine, where they're in phase 3 trials and they're not actually observing the trials there. So let's put that one aside. But there are over 300 different types of vaccines. There are about 9 to 10 vaccines in phase 3 trials. That means that there's about 30,000 people being tested on these trials at the moment that are actually going to get the vaccine. And there's a number of vaccines being tested in South Africa. There's the Chadox vaccine. There's another vaccine that they are trying on people with HIV, without HIV, so we can see what the effect is. So I'm quite hopeful that within the next 6 to 12 months, we should be getting a vaccine. That being said, I'm not a politician, but I do believe that Trump might whip it out sort of a week before the elections to say, here's the vaccine, let's go with it. It's the race between Trump and Putin and between Trump and Biden, who's going to whip out something that they can get their votes up. So who knows what's going to happen from that side. With regards to distribution of vaccine, well, that's a big problem, because, you're going to need to create billions of vaccines. We need 60 to 70% of the population to have immunity in order to get this herd immunity that we've spoken about many times, so that people are not sort of influenced and can't get affected by the virus. And that's going to take a long time. That can take up to 2 years. That depends on the amount of vaccine that can be made by all the companies. Does the government, do they make it accessible to people, or who does it go to first? And that we'll see with time. I know that the US government has spent over $10 billion underwriting the vaccines that they are doing in their country, so that they are taking the risk for these vaccines that's in phase 3 trials to start producing them already so they can start rolling them out. So we can only but hope that the vaccines, when they come, will be rolled out quickly. I mean, the other day, the World Health Organization said that there was now a total eradication of polio. That vaccine took 65 years. We're now on 6 months, and we're in phase 3 trials. So hopefully we're on the right wicket here.
Really amazing. Anton, before I go back to Siobhan for a couple of questions, again, a very sincere thank you, to your colleagues, to your family, to everybody for everything that you've done. My screen has gone blank. Give me a second, I'm back. Just want to ask a question to Siobhan. Sorry, I've gone blank on my screen. I'll come back. Siobhan, just this market, we spoke a lot about the tech shares running. You spoke about the massive disparity between the shares that are doing well and the shares that aren't, both here in South Africa and around the world. This morning over breakfast, one of my colleagues and myself were discussing where we are relative to what feels like an inevitable correction in the market. And that's quite, there's almost like a binary discussion. On the one part, you say markets can't run like this forever. They seem to be completely disconnected with the profits. In particular, we spoke about Apple on the one hand. On the other hand, we spoke about banks. We spoke retail shares. We spoke about property shares. All of these sitting north of negative 40 for the year. That's just South Africa. But I know that echoes around the world. What's the 91 view in terms of where are we in terms of a correction? And obviously we can't predict this. We wouldn't be sitting on a webinar if we could correct that particular one. But what's Siobhan Simpson's opinion? What's the 91 opinion? Where do you guys hold in there?
I think as long as you continue to see, and it's something that the guys talk about every week and debate. I think as long as you continue to see the markets, the market participants, so the central banks, the governments supporting, you'll continue to see markets go up and grind higher. So there was a whole lot of letters at the beginning of this whole thing. We were going to have a V shape, a W shape, an L shape, all different kinds of letters that were then it became a swoosh, and then it became a square root. And I mean, pretty much any shape that you could have imagined, it was in the pot to be spoken about. And I think there are industries that are going to change fundamentally because our behaviors will change. And I think what is going to happen is that the weak will essentially go out of business and the strong businesses will continue. And that will happen across industries. So you've already seen the start of the rights issues, the starts of the bankruptcies and things like that. And it'll enable the strong ones to either pick up assets or to pick up customers and get stronger. So the biggest thing that our guys have been concerned about is whether the companies can make it through 1 month, 3 months, 5 months, whatever it is, without cash flows. So making sure that the balance sheets are strong. And those are the kind of shares that we have invested in. What's to say when the crash comes is the market not believing that there'll be more stimulus. So you can see it kind of get nervous when the packages don't get signed and sort of things don't happen as expected. So I think for me, it's in the uncertainty, making sure that you've invested in companies that can make it through the period of time. So, and I apologize for anyone who's got other holdings, but even within a sector, which is like the bank sector, which has been under severe pressure, make sure you hold the ones that are better quality than the others. And our preferred ones in that space are First Rand and Standard Bank. If they do develop a vaccine and it's quicker than we think and it can be distributed and there's essentially this exuberance and an upside that no one had foreseen, the more, what's the word I'm looking for? Value type stocks. So your ABSA and your Nedbank will rally harder, will be a better place to be. But at the moment, we probably don't see that happening. You rather almost, for me as Siobhan, I would rather miss out on a little bit of the upside and play it safe, for lack of a better word.
Siobhan, I'm not going to just say this. No, It did, very much so. And I'm not just saying this because you're on the line. I said this because I truly believe this. You mentioned before that people said that I grew up within 91 asset management. But just knowing that we've got the likes of Claude Rousseau and Shamesh Chetty in your quality space. You've got your deep value in the John Bickhards of this world. You've got your Philip Saunders and, of course, your Gal Daniels. We've got not just top South African asset managers, but world leaders in a field. And it is, I can tell you, as my clients often tell me, that it is a wonderful relief for them to know that we are steering the ship, even though these are incredibly choppy waters, knowing that we can pretty much onset some of that risk onto you and use your great depth of asset management teams inside there. It's a huge relief to us knowing that you guys are on top of it.
Thanks, Menachem. And I think the benefit of it as well is all the people that you mentioned there. And for those of you who don't know on the call, we have almost different portfolio managers that think differently about the world. So John Bickhard manages money in a value strategy, very different to everyone else. And the benefit, I think, of that is incredibly important during times like this, because they're all in one room every morning and they are debating across. And I think that results in a much richer belief in how you invest and stronger positions that I think will enable you to deliver outperformance over time.
Thank you.
And it makes my life a lot more interesting.
No, I'm sure it does. So, ladies and gentlemen, before I hand over to Stephen to do the wrap up, I just want to again speak about next week's webinar, 10 to 11 as always, specifically focusing on offshore investments, the different products that Octagon has to offer, what is available out there, making offshore investing so much easier, and protecting your investments in hard currency, because if ever there were a call for global diversification, it is now. And but it is not too late. And so this webinar will take 10 to 11 next week. Stephen, if I could hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, Siobhan, Dr. Meyberg, your time is precious. Thank you so much to the both of you for taking the time and sharing your expertise with all of us today. It really is absolutely insightful. I'm a numbers person, and I'm sitting here just reveling in the numbers and the story that the numbers are telling us. Early on in my career, I was taught that market rallies are strongest when they're broad-based, and weakest when they're on the basis of a handful of blue chip large cap stocks. And those numbers are just coming through quite eerily and somewhat spookily. Dr. Meyberg, on the numbers of the virus, looking at developments across the world. We are the country in the world with the 5th highest rate of infections. And thankfully, it appears as though we're about to lose that number 5, somewhat less than coveted spot to certain countries, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, Central and South America. And hopefully we start dropping down the ranking tables, because we certainly want to be a lot closer to the bottom than we are at the top. So thank you for your insight in all of that. To all of you joining this morning's session, thank you for your time and for the support. Really looking forward to next week's session. The invitation will be going out later today, so please do keep an eye on your inboxes and rally as many people as you can that you think might be interested in that. We really have a great lineup for next week, and we look forward to hosting you all once again. Thank you. Have a great day. Stay safe, stay warm, stay healthy. Just really follow the guidelines. Hopefully we have a great rundown to level 1 and beyond. Thank you so much.